Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you good people. So I want to talk with you this morning about the power of acceptance and unconditional love. And on the way to talking about that, I want to talk about how we get into a place where we need acceptance and unconditional love. Okay? And I'm going to be talking about this somewhat in terms of my experience, just as a way of illustrating what I want to talk about. But understand as I'm talking about this that what I'm talking about is a universal process that we all go through. And so as I'm describing this, what I'm hoping you'll do is to look to your own experience of how this happened, what I'm getting ready to describe. Okay? So the way, as far as I can see, the way it goes for a human being is at the beginning, we're born into a state of innocence. In my own case, at one point I was this little boy named David. And, I recognize there's certain bias here, but judging from the photos and stuff that, that survive, it looks like David was just about the cutest kid who's ever lived. In particular, he was really skinny, like really, really skinny. He had knobby knees, he had knobby elbows, kind of like awkward looking, but in a cute sort of way. He had freckles, and this is going to be really difficult to imagine probably since you're looking at me right now, but he had a huge pile of curly hair on his head that looks like it was never combed or cut. Just big pile. And the thing about David, this little kid David, is that he was really here. He was in this life. He was embodied. He wasn't self-conscious. He wasn't concerned about himself. He was just here. And because he was here, he experienced this world that we live in, and he experienced his own self with a sense of wonder and awe. I can remember, he loved being outside. And I can remember this one particular place where we lived, where we had this huge backyard. It had a cherry tree, it had plum trees, and it seemed, it was probably actually really small, but for him, it just seemed immense. And, he loved just like being in the grass, and he loved, all the little critters, just like, bugs and stuff jumping around. He loved, in particular, that cherry tree, and he loved to lay underneath the cherry tree and look up into the branches and watching the wind through the branches. And I remember one time, this is in my book, but one of the most vivid memories from that time in my life was looking up there and realizing, watching the leaves move in the wind, and realizing that there's something other than me that is making things happen. And it just seemed like such a revelation that there's something larger than me that is making all this happen. So I invite you for a moment to see if you can, in your own mind's eye, you might close your eyes as you do this if you want to, that might make it easier, but see in your own mind's eye if you can see yourself like that as a little kid. Remember, there's that little girl, that little boy. Remember what he or she looked like. Can you see the innocence there? Can you see the openness there? And the wonder? Can you feel love for this little person? And in my own case, that little boy, David, he lives inside of me still. Can you feel that inside of you? Can you feel that little boy or little girl inside of you, and how he or she still lives inside of you? And the thing about David, and your equivalent of David, is that there's nothing wrong with this little boy or little girl. There wasn't anything wrong with David. He was perfect just as he was. And even now, as I think about him, I love him. I love him inside of me, because he's beautiful. He's a beautiful, wonderful expression of life. And I love that in him. So the next thing that happens is that doesn't last. and we begin to grow up. And as we begin to grow up, we have to find a way to fit into this world that we live in. And this world that we live in, as is, I'm sure is obvious to all of you, is full of all sorts of unhappiness, all sorts of confusion, prejudice, unfairness. And we have to learn to somehow fit into that world. The people who are raising us, and just as an aside, this is not about blaming anybody who raised us, okay? Because what happened to us was happened to them, and they're just doing with us, almost kind of for us, because we had to go through this process, what was done to and for them. So we don't have to get into any kind of blame. But, you know, what happened is that we all were forced, required, to leave our authentic nature, to leave that wonder and that awe and that innocence and that connection. That's the other thing about little David, and I'm sure about the equivalent in you. He was connected. We're forced to leave that, all of that, and also the great mystery that is around all the things, around and inside of everything that we're in touch with when we're little children. We're required to leave that behind in order to become someone who is adapted to and fits into the world at large. So I don't know how you see that, but what I see about that is the way that happens is we take on a series of beliefs and assumptions about the way things are that are completely fictional and kind of poisonous, actually. But it's the kind of stuff that we all accept because we all were taught these things. For example, we're taught that there's a real thing that's called good and a real thing that's called bad. And it's possible to be one or the other. So think about being a little kid suddenly confronted with that thought. Because, you know, as a little kid, that's not a part of your reality. I mean, there is no good and bad. There just is what is. There's the adventure of life and the magic of life that's unfolding. Now, suddenly, I'm in a world where I could be good or I could be bad, and it's really bad to be bad, right? Other things, right and wrong, same thing. You know, I can be a good person, the right person, I can be the wrong person. These are really scary things for a little kid. And we're punished for not following the rules, not following the way that society is set up. I think we could even go so far as to say we're punished for being ourselves. You know, because a little kid, it goes through a training process. It's almost like, in the book I compared it to like, I think, if that's still in there, I can't remember actually, but I compared it to like potty training. You know, you'll have an accident, you know, and the accident is you suddenly accidentally become yourself. And then something really bad happens to you. You're humiliated for that, or you're told, you know, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not following the rules. And so there's this training process that we go through where we have to leave who we really are and become this sort of fake, fictional person who fits into society. And of course, the standards and expectations that are, you know, a part of that for a little kid don't make any sense. Like that just, and they're unexpected and they're unpredictable. So a little kid's just going along just being himself or herself, and then out of the blue, you're going, blam, you know, shut up, or you're being the wrong kid or something. And over time, you know, the kid sort of dopes out, okay, here's what the rules and expectations are, here's the way to be bad, and the way to be bad is just to be spontaneous and be myself. So I need to give that up for my own survival, really. I need to give that up, and I need to become this good little boy or good little girl instead. And in the middle of that, or underneath it, is, and I look at this, so there's this thing I call conditioned mind, which is, it's sort of the internalization of what I'm talking about right now. It's a collection of beliefs and assumptions and thought patterns that help us to survive in the world, this crazy world that we live in. It helps us to adapt and be a part of things, you know, and be a part of society. And, you know, conditioned mind, when we're little, that's actually useful in a certain sense because we have to adapt. You can't survive just being a kid who remains just being authentic. You have to learn how to survive. And so conditioned mind gets invented as a way of making sure that I don't accidentally become who I really am, and I make sure that I consistently am being the person I'm supposed to be. Or, I mean, if we really look into it, I mean, see if this is your experience or not, I think The world, the reality people are living in is they're trying to be the person they should be and failing. That's kind of where it really gets ugly and difficult. But anyway, so a foundational part of what I call conditioned mind, of this system of survival that is internalized in our mind, is self-judgment. So we learn to judge ourselves for being ourselves. So the right way to be is this inauthentic person. The wrong way to be is this authentic person. And for everyone, that looks a little bit different. For me in particular, some of the messaging that I took on was, I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate, I'm too needy, I'm not lovable, things like that. And there can be positive versions of that too. But we all take those on, and we believe that those are true. And so what's going on in conditioned mind is that there's a continual story being told about that, okay, that talks us into believing that. Because if you think about it, and look to yourself in this too. When I think about, the little boy who I was there anything wrong with him? No, not at all. He was beautiful, a perfect expression of life. And so it doesn't make any sense that there would be something wrong with him, or there'd be this kind of judgment. So we have to talk ourselves into that all the time. So, we're going along, for me, the way it's been often in my life is maybe I'm in some kind of like work situation and things doesn't go exactly perfectly. Then here comes the voice of self-judgment in my mind to beat me up and tell me, well, you're a loser, that was no good. See, you're never going to measure up, you're never going to be the person you should be, and on and on and on like that. And the point of that is to make sure that it's kind of like it locks the whole system in place. And it makes it to make sure that I'm safely in this separate self, this fake persona that will allow me to survive in the world. Okay? And so, of course, that experience is that's not a happy thing. For me personally, I went from being David to being Dave. So I started calling myself Dave, and Dave was not a happy guy. Dave was, super self-conscious, afraid of people, afraid of being, humiliated and punished and all that, because that's happening up here. He's being humiliated and punished all the time up here, so he's afraid of that. He doesn't know what's happening up here, actually. He thinks it's happening out there. So, I did all kinds of crazy things, and I won't go into that too much, but, living in vehicles, being way out in the desert, just whatever I could do to get far enough away from other people where I'd have like a little break from the punishment that was happening inside my own mind that got internalized. So that may sound kind of extreme, but what I'll ask you to do now, kind of like we did in just a minute, look to your own experience, and you can close your eyes or not, whatever would be helpful. But look to your experience of how you were socialized and how you were conditioned. And in particular, what were the messages that you received? What were you taught to believe about yourself that isn't true, but that you accepted as a way of limiting your own ability to be here and present and to adapt to society instead? So just consider that for a moment. So what happened in my own case, and this is something I will be forever, eternally, to the last second of my life, profoundly grateful for, is that I found another way. That's funny. I wasn't expecting the tears. There's another way to be in this life than to live as this fake, unhappy, dissatisfied person. There's a completely different possibility. Unfortunately, and this is really hard to witness in this world that we live in, it appears as if not everyone is provided an opportunity to find that out. It requires willingness, it requires deep commitment, it requires a ton of guts to do it, because to escape from the world of conditioned mind is just about the scariest thing you can do. Because conditioned mind, if it's survival, This is what I need in order to survive. And I'm going to give that up? You're telling me to let that go on some kind of like a chance that there's some other way to be? It's scary. But anyway, we need the courage and the determination and the willingness, but we also need the information. And the information is not a part of our culture at large. Although it feels kind of like it's becoming more and more so, actually. But in general, it's not a part of our culture at large. We need to be taught how things work inside our minds. Because the way that we suffer, that word suffer is a little bit problematic because in the Buddhist world that I spend a lot of time in, it's kind of a technical word. And, the way my teacher would talk about that, somebody would ask her, what does it mean to suffer? She would say, suffering is the experience of being a self who is separate from life. And life there kind of has a capital L. It's sort of a impersonal way of talking about, God or divinity or spirit or whatever you want to call that. So it's, we suffer because we experience the illusion of a self that's separate from life. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so the possibility is that we can see that self is fictional. That's not who I really am. We're so powerfully conditioned to think that is who I am that it's really difficult to let it go. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of paying attention, even just to see it. But that's the possibility that exists for us on this earth, as far as I can tell. I would even go so far as to say that's what we're here to do. We're here to realize that we're not the conditioned self that we believe ourselves to be, and to unite with this larger thing, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So anyway, it was miraculous for me that I was given that opportunity, and completely unexpected. I mean, I had no idea it was even out there. I just figured life is suffering, and I didn't even think that. I mean, it's just, this is reality. I'm in a state of pain and confusion and self-doubt and all stuff like that, a lot of the time, and that's just how life is, and I'm just going to have to figure out how to survive that until I die. But then here comes the information, and the information came in the form of a person who understood this and taught it to me, and that person became my teacher. And as you know, I decided to go to a monastery in order to learn what she obviously understood, but I didn't. And so I went. And so in terms of our evolution as humans, so we start in a state of innocence, we move into conditioned mind, and then if we're lucky, if we're fortunate, and I include all of you in you're lucky and very fortunate camp, because you're here today. And that's what this place is all about, is this kind of transformation that I'm talking about. You're obviously open to the possibility of growing in ways that take you beyond how you're conditioned to be. So you're super fortunate. I hope you really get that, how lucky you are to be having this experience, to be having a life where you have this opportunity. It's an incredible gift. So anyway, so we go from innocence into conditioned mind, we suffer, and then for those of us who are fortunate, the next thing that can happen is we move out of suffering back to innocence. But it's different than it was before. So in that place, like for me personally, just to some extent, I've gone through that process, and I'll go ahead and, just put it out there that it's not a finished process for me at all. I'm not standing up here trying to present myself as someone who's finished anything. It's not the case. As a matter of fact, just last week, this whole thing happened where I went back into this old way of being, got identified with it, and it was extremely interesting, very uncomfortable, but helpful. But that's always a possibility. There's a difference between the person we were taught to be and this larger thing that I'm getting ready to talk about. So we go from innocence into experience, and then the possibility that's here is we can come back to innocence, but because we've gone through that, now we all, in addition to the innocence, we also have awareness. We have consciousness. We have experience. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, think about that for a second. A lot of times in my life, I've suffered a lot. I know you probably have too. And a lot of times I'm like, geez, like who invented this whole setup? I mean, this is crazy. This is extremely difficult and painful. What are we doing here? But then when you step back and look at it from this place, it's like, wow, it's perfect. That's perfect, because we have to have the awareness. Like little David didn't, he was present, but he didn't have awareness. He didn't know what was going on. He was aware, to a certain extent he had awareness. He was aware of the grass and the trees and the birds and stuff, but he wasn't aware of himself, really. He didn't really have the cognitive ability to do that. And he certainly wasn't aware of conditioned mind and all the things that happen in conditioned mind to cause us to live in a state of suffering as a separate self, as I was talking about before. So it's magical. It's kind of perfect. For those who have the opportunity, you get to go through that process and return to the state of innocence with awareness and consciousness, and then you can see the whole. It's like you can see the whole playing field. And from that place, there's a choice. Do I want to live as this person who suffers? Or would I rather be free of that? And that choice is absolutely available once we have learned how to move back into that state of innocence and awareness. So, just to make a long story short, I went to the monastery. You could say Dave went to the monastery in a way. And then something started to happen where, most of the time when I was there, especially at the beginning, because it was rugged, we're living in silence, and, you have to do what you're told all the time, and it's cold, and, it was difficult. And, and of course, Dave, having gone into that with his total sense of inadequacy and incompetence, every tiny little thing scared him. I can't remember if this stayed in the book or not, but there's this concrete stoop. I'd only been there for like 3 days, and I was supposed to pour this concrete stoop, this little stair. And I thought that I was going to die. I can't possibly do that. It's completely, beyond my reach. But, I did it, and it was fun because it was concrete. It stayed. So the whole time I was there, every time I stepped on that step, I actually did that. Actually, that was untrue, that I couldn't do that. So anyway, little story. But so what happened over time is gradually, so most of the time I was being Dave, but gradually there started to be these glimpses of this other possibility. There's this other thing that I am that's not me. And with work and practice, and of course I'm getting a ton of help with this, then over time I learned that I could actually move there consciously. And, going back and forth, going back and forth, going back and forth. But over time I learned that it's actually possible to live there. And so this place that I'm talking about it's not, it's human, of course, because I'm human, but it's not the experience of a separate self who suffers. In a way, it's very personal. When you're in that place, you're taking everything personally. This is all happening to me. I'm getting triggered all over the place by all these things that are happening because I'm taking everything personally. But that's not what's happening over here. Over here, it's impersonal, which is kind of wild to think about, isn't it? That as a being with a body, I can have an impersonal experience of life. It's not about me, because there isn't anybody there. In that place, there's nobody there. There's not a person to suffer, and that's why you don't suffer. It's kind of like in different traditions, people talk about it as like the God within, or this kind of thing, as a way of kind of indicating that that's different from this me who I have assumed for so long is myself. Because in my experience, and I don't know about yours, but in my experience, when I move out of that little small, identified place into this larger place, I feel more like me than I've ever felt before in my life. But it's not that me. So in my case, it's not Dave with all his confusion and angst and upset. It's this big, powerful, loving, open, conscious, and aware experience. So I invite you now, again, just to close your eyes or not, but see if you can tap into that for you too. That big place inside, the place that's not personal, that is expansive, that's loving, open, available, connected. And feel what that feels like for a moment. Feel how open it is. Feel how unlimited it is. Notice that in this place is what you're looking for. We run around, trying to look for what we're looking for in all kinds of ways that don't work, through outside things. And it actually is all in here, and it's been here all the time. It's always been here. The peace, the connection, the joy, the belonging. It's all been in here this whole time. So the last piece that in this kind of scheme that I'm laying out for you that I'll throw in is that in this, and this to me, I hope you'll understand what I'm saying. I think you will. But this to me is kind of this is my favorite part, and kind of the miracle of our human existence. Okay? There's this separate self, who in this case I'm calling Dave. There's who I really am, my authentic nature, conscious compassion and awareness. And when I move from this to this doesn't go away. Because there's something authentic in this. Dave he's a real entity in a certain sense, but he's just been conditioned, and so he suffers. But inherently he doesn't suffer. So when I move here, because a part of what he is here is clarity and compassion, I can see him. I can see that there's a person here who's suffering, and that's not me. It's almost like it's another person who's living inside of me. And here's the miraculous part. And when I got this, or started to get it, took a long time to get it actually. I'm still getting it, of course, in a lot of ways. But it blew my mind, because I can save him. I can save this suffering human. Excuse me. I can save this suffering human from the reality he lives in, because it's not real. He doesn't have to live there anymore. Because I, from this bigger place, can see there's nothing wrong with this guy. There never has been. He was just taught that there was, and he believed it. That's it. He's not incompetent. He's not inadequate. Quite the opposite. He's incredibly competent. He's adequate to everything that comes his way. He's a beautiful human being. So no different from David in a way. He's just a little bit older. He's a precious being. But he's confused. He doesn't know that. If I become him, I get confused too, and then I suffer. And that, like I said, that happened last week even. It hadn't happened that way in a long time, and it was fascinating. Okay, here we go again. Where are my tools? I've kind of, misplaced my tools. So get out the tools and okay, let's go to work. What's going on? What's happening in my mind? What am I believing that's not true? All these tools that I learned at the monastery as a way. And then finally, it lasted like 36 hours. I popped out, and then as I actually popped out, and I was in the morning, I drove down here from Asheville, and oh my God, it was a glorious day. It was just beautiful, expansive, and it was amazing to see the contrast between those two states. But anyway, so the possibility is that from this place I can save him from his experience, because I'm not confused in this place. I know there's nothing wrong with him, and I can teach him that. And that's a very active thing in my life. Is I'm talking to him all the time. I'm saying no, especially if something difficult's happening. If things are just he's not really here because his needs are taken care of. Not so much, but especially if something difficult happens, I'm like, I'm here with you. I'll take care of you. I love you. I love you unconditionally. I accept you just the way you are. You don't have to prove anything to have my love. You don't have to be different. You don't have to improve yourself. Nothing. I love you exactly as you are. And this relationship, this is what a happy life is learning how to step out of being that conditioned person and to love and accept that conditioned person as he or she is. It's sort of like that's where it all comes together, and that's where life becomes truly joyful. Because, the human experience has not been excluded. It's been included in that. He has been saved from that experience. So I'll invite you one more time to see if you can get in touch with that part of you, and in touch with the love in you that can reach into that part of you. Feel the love that you are. Notice the awareness that you are and the compassion that you are in your authentic nature. Notice the clarity you have inherently that you can see. You can see what's so. And then offer that to the parts of you who need, the part or parts of you who need that love. And notice, what do they need? What do they need from you? They need your unconditional love. They need your acceptance. They need your loving attention. This is the work, as far as I'm concerned. This is the work. This is what we're here to do. To be who we are and to experience the life that is ours to live. Because that's what happens from that place. Suddenly, I'm here and I'm in the life that I am here to live. And I'm taken care of. I'm deeply taken care of in myself. So I invite you all to practice that, to join me in making that, what you are here to do. To save yourself from suffering, to become who you really are, and in that experience the joy of life on this earth. Thank you.